Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, welcome to today's episode of All Things Policy. I'm Sridhar Krishna, and I work at Takshashila Institution researching on AI governance. Today, we are discussing a topic that's on many people's minds, artificial intelligence and its impact on the future of work. And more importantly, how does one survive and thrive in the age of AI? And to discuss this with me, I've got Anupriya Mohta. Anu is an alumni of Takshashila, an old friend, and we've worked together for a while on this Takshashila's 20 Million Jobs project. Welcome to this episode, Anu.
Thanks for having me, Sridhar. Great to be reunited on this topic.
And it's basically no secret that AI is rapidly transforming industries across the board. You know it from your experience at work, and from automating tasks to creating entirely new job roles, its influence is undeniable. You were talking a little while earlier about how we all use AI now in for various things that we do. I mean, we take all our notes, put it into Notebook LLM or something else, LM, and use ChatGPT to refine our emails and so on and so forth. So I think the influence of AI is undeniable today. But with all this talk about AI, many people are left wondering, what skills do I need to succeed in this new AI-driven economy? And and that's really what we want to focus on today. Yeah.
I think that's such a great question, especially with this topic being on top of every mind. I think it's interesting to see AI has now become the top acronym that anyone ever wants to use. And I've got myself wondering what it actually means as well. So I'm very excited to jump in today and draw on some insights from some of the world's leading experts on this subject, right? I think they had some great discussions earlier this year at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos. And let's jump in there and see what these leaders from business, government, civil society had to say on some of the most pressing challenges that is facing the world, and AI being one of the biggest hot topics in how it's going to revolutionize the workforce and more in the coming few years.
Absolutely. And one of the key themes that emerged was the importance of developing certain skills to thrive in an AI-driven world. These skills are essential not just for individuals, but also for organizations and nations looking to stay competitive. Because this could be a game changer, right? I mean, you might find situations that nations that adopt AI better or companies that leverage this in a much more effective manner could leapfrog competition and go places where they couldn't have otherwise. So, yeah.
And we seem to be in that era where each nation is hustling to be at the front of the AI race as well in some ways. So let's start with what are these skills even, Sridhar? The sources that you and I have looked up and the work that we've done, the research that you've done actually highlight a range of both technical and soft skills that are needed to succeed in this new AI era as well. So tell us more about it.
Yeah, I think so. On the technical side, a basic understanding of AI and machine learning is becoming increasingly valuable. Just like, if you look at 30 years ago or something, I mean, it was very useful to start learning how to use a computer, right?
Yeah.
Many people didn't know how to use a computer, and there were companies like AppTech and NIIT in India made a big business out of just teaching people basic computer skills, how do you learning Word and Excel and so on, so forth. Those things became so important. So I think a basic understanding is very valuable. You don't necessarily need to be a data scientist. I don't think anybody's sort of suggesting that every single person has to become a data scientist, but understanding how AI works and its potential applications, that can help you to leverage these technologies in your work much more effectively and stay on top of the game. Everybody talks about, you're not going to be replaced by an AI. You're going to be replaced by someone who uses AI. I think, AI. It's everybody has heard of this, but I think it's definitely true. And that's something that I think from a technical side, I think that would be very useful to get a good understanding of what these things are.
Yeah. And I think something that you said, right? It's not just about using AI, but making sure that AI is useful for you, right? So as
Yeah.
AI becomes more integrated in all of our business processes, like you said, I don't think I've written an email by myself in the last 6 months without the use of AI. Data literacy is also becoming essential. A lot of studies actually show that when people blindly follow what AI is saying, they tend to make more mistakes, the quality output falls, productivity falls. But when you are actually using AI in a manner that is deliberate, you know how to prompt it to get the answers that you need, your productivity
Yeah.
improves as well. And therefore, it becomes important to understand how to interpret, manipulate, and really analyze the outputs that AI is giving you and make it meaningful for yourself and inform your decision making. So it's definitely not about AI doing your work. In some ways, but AI supplementing what you can do and making decision making faster, easier for you as well.
Yeah, basically, I mean, like you said, I think it's about being comfortable using the technology, staying updated with the latest tech trends, and being willing to adapt to new tools and platforms. I think playing with stuff is very critical today. I think today it might still feel like just play. It may not be absolutely essential to use it in your day to day work. But I think not playing with it today is going to cost you dearly in the future.
Yeah,
So I think it might be a reverse of the ant and the grasshopper story, where the one who's playing around with these tools is actually going to be on top in the future. So yeah,
I
maybe
love
Somerset Mom had it right. Yeah. Anyway,
it. Imagine
yeah,
Somerset Mom talking about AI. I love that. Okay, so let's move on that topic. Let's move on to what are the soft skills that are just as important and perhaps
yeah,
even more important in an AI driven world, right? I think one of the skills that has been highlighted by multiple experts is critical thinking, especially as we see the volume of information that AI generates. It's important to discern fact from fiction, make sound judgments based on evidence, and really ensure that you're using your critical thinking skills, decision making skills, and everything you've learned that only a human can learn, perhaps in some ways, are being put to the test as you evaluate AI's critical output as well.
yeah, yeah. I think whatever we've been discussing so far is all right, is true, is absolutely essential. But I also feel that most of our listeners know these things quite intuitively. Everybody does know that, everybody believes that critical thinking is important. People know that, being able to discern fact from fiction, know that AI can do a lot of stuff, but, you need to know how to write your prompts. I think those things are right. At the same time, I think understanding what AI can do and all that is important. But I was reading a book, but I was thinking let's go a bit deeper for our audience because I know that they are much more discerning. And I was reading a book called Human Plus Machine and Reimagining Work in the Age of AI by Paul Doherty and James Wilson.
Mhm.
These people were, I mean, they were senior colleagues at Accenture where I used to work. And they've also written another article more recently in the Harvard Business Review called Embracing Gen AI at Work. And the first and the key point they make is that the future is not like many people worry that AI is doing all the work and humans do nothing, right? But I also read another book and I wrote something around those lines, which book by Daniel Susskind, which talks about a world without work, right? So
Mm.
there are people who believe that there is a world without work. And there are interesting things around it. We could talk about it if we do have some more time. But if you look at Paul and James, I think what they want us to believe is that there's a more creative and a productive future ahead of us, right? And there's a significant and a profitable human AI collaboration rather than just an AI doing everything. There would be everybody would have like an AI assistant, someone who's sort of an AI that's going to make you better at what you do, or an AI that's able to help you to do things that you couldn't do yourself earlier. It could be combining tasks, but I think this is going to be largely true, at least in the near term, where there is AI human collaboration is going to be the way of the future. Yeah.
I love that idea of AI human collaboration being the way of the future, but there at the same time, there is also conversation of AI potentially replacing jobs. While there is a whole
Yes.
school of thought on AI and humans collaborating to make a better future, there is also a real fear that people have that AI might replace jobs, right? So before we even get into the skills that will be required to thrive in this new AI economy. Tell us a little bit more about your work, Sridhar, in this space and this idea of what jobs are at risk when the AI advent does happen.
Yeah, in fact, thanks for asking. And I think it's a good pitch for my upcoming paper, which is getting published very soon. Basically, I recently co authored a paper on how tasks may transition to AI. And it's important to realize that I use the word tasks specifically and not jobs, right? So, because I don't think jobs transition to AI, it's like specific tasks that AI becomes better at doing than others, right? So it'll be the transition will happen at a task level and not at a job level. So that's the first thing to sort of think of. Then let's imagine a funnel, right? A simple funnel where first you sort of evaluate, you understand what AI can do today. And AI is increasingly able to do many, many, many things, right? I think from a time where it could just do simple tasks to now it can, I mean, generative AI has just transformed the imagination of people, at least. I think lots of people had an idea of what AI could do, but I think when they saw things like Gemini and like Chat GPT and other things sort of coming out there, and you could just play with it, I think that sort of dramatically sort of people said, "Oh wow! I mean, wow! If it can do these things, then am I needed at all?" So first step is for us to understand what is the status of AI technology today and what can AI do? What are the tasks that AI can do? And it's increasingly able to do more and more things, but there is definitely a difference in terms of its maturity in each of these areas. Right? So once you have a broad set at the right top of the funnel on what AI can do, then you look at the ROI in terms of like, what does it take to, what's the investment required to deploy this technology? And what's the kind of return you're going to get in terms of increased
Yeah.
productivity, quality, blah, blah, blah. And then compare it with the tech maturity that exists at this level. So I created a nice sort of 2x2 matrix in our paper where we talked about where you have things with low AI maturity and low ROI. Obviously, like, there's no immediate opportunity for AI deployment.
Yeah.
Where this returns are small and the AI itself is not very mature, and then you're not going to use it, obviously. At the same
Mhm.
time, on the top right corner of the matrix, you'd have a situation where there's high AI maturity and high ROI, in which case those would be the first set of tasks that you would consider for deployment, right? So I think that's something that you would do. You'd shortlist this for AI deployment. And then in the case where there is high ROI, but like low AI maturity, then you might use this to sort of improve speed and productivity, but it'll be done with like, human augmented capabilities. So you just use that to sort of, like, for instance, I mean, I would go and do, if I'm writing a paper, for instance, in the past, I would do a simple Google search on the topic. I would try and like find papers in that area. It would take me maybe a few hours or maybe a few days sometimes before I could come up with a good set of documents that I want to read. And before I sort of start writing, I would sort of read on topics that others have already written. So I understand that there are gaps or there are some opportunities where I could go in and fill, and there are things that nobody has written about or talked about, and I could do that. While now I just use AI to do that, and it happens. Like I get sources for, or I look at like I wanted something, and I just write and say, hey, I want to do this podcast on how to thrive in an AI economy, and like give me some topics, and it gives me a bunch of other podcasts or other people what they have said, and so on and so forth. But I can't obviously just use it and just say AI generate this. I can't go to Notebook LM, ask AI to generate the podcast and just publish it. I mean, it would be very banal and it wouldn't be fun for anyone to really listen to. So I could use this to improve speed and productivity, but I can't use it to do that. So that's where the AI is not mature enough to sort of do stuff on its own. While similarly, well, AI may be mature, but in some cases, the cost of deploying that AI may be very high. So the ROI may be low. And therefore, then you'll wait for it to become cheaper before you actually see deployment of such AI. Once you've gone down the funnel, then you look at explainability and harm, right? So I think that's very important because people are not going to want AI to be deployed in areas where the potential for harm is high.
Yeah.
And the explainability or verifiability of the AI itself is very low. So you don't know if it's giving you the right recommendation or it's taking the right action. It's just that you know that it can do the action, but you don't
Yeah.
know if it's the right one. What if there are errors? And if there are errors, how do we know? So if you can't explain something, if you can't verify something, would you deploy something which is critical? No. But if it's not very critical, if it's in a non-critical task, you might be willing to sort of, if the expected harm is low, you might be willing to use AI to give you some inputs while a human sort of gets involved and does some actions along with it, right? And but today, like call center work, for instance, in most cases, I would say fits in the area where the expected harm is quite low, and so therefore you might go out and say its explainability and verifiability is high, but its expected harm is low. So why not sort of deploy this? So I think that's how that would work, right? And then after you've gone through this sort of funnel, you've gone through the stage where you've looked at what AI can do, you've looked at ROI, you've looked at AI tech maturity, you've looked at expected harm, you've looked at the ability to explain and verify that AI, then you look at other implementation barriers. You have situations where there are lots of people who will like sort of lose jobs. Like, for
Mm.
instance, a couple of years ago, Nitin Gadkari was asked, would you allow driverless cars in India? And he said, no, I'll never allow driverless cars in India because we've got so many millions of drivers in our country and we don't want them to lose jobs. Right.
Yeah.
So I think I'm not saying that it'll never come, a driverless car will never come into India. I don't think Gadkari also means that. But what he meant was at that particular point in time,
Protection of jobs.
protecting jobs also becomes important. And there are people who would sort of come out and if it can be done, if there's an ability in some types of AI implementations, you do need regulatory authorities, you need like approvals from various people before it can sort of come out. And therefore you would find that, those things might take a little longer before they get sort of implemented. So I
Yeah.
think finally the few that pass all these tests will be the ones where you'll see AI deployment. In our paper, we took a few examples in the areas of education. We looked at teaching, for instance. I mean,
Hmm.
look at education. We said teachers. It's not that teachers will be replaced by AI, but I think you can improve the quality of teaching across the board.
Yeah.
You can raise the bar. Today there is a difference between there are teachers who are 10x as good as somebody else, right? You can get the same curriculum that maybe MIT uses for a third tier engineering college in India. And you could have access to lectures by those people, and your professors in less qualified professors could work as highly qualified teaching assistants, and they could sort of help in sorting out things. You could have AI tutors and so on. I mean, I think there's so many other things which can happen with this, and that's how that will work. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, Sridhar, because in everything that you said, even though the question that we started with is what jobs can be replaced by AI, but my big takeaway in everything that you said was also it's not necessarily going to be jobs first, right? It's tasks potentially, and
Yeah.
then when those tasks are automated, and automation has been the way of the world for ages now, right? But when those tasks are made better or automated by AI, it also frees up time for people to do more potentially, but it then becomes important for us to make sure that they have the skill sets that they need to be able to take advantage of this AI era as well, right? And what you said about maybe using MIT curriculum in a tier 3 college in India, the idea of democratization is embedded in this principle of AI as well, from what I hear. But let's come back then to the skills question. So, as tasks are getting automated, what skills do we actually need to survive and thrive in this AI economy? How do we get better and make sure we're ready to take advantage of this technology and make sure that we're at the cutting edge, really?
Thanks. I know we've gone through about almost 20 minutes of this podcast and not answered those questions more specifically. And I think Paul Doherty and James Wilson, whom we were talking about just before I sort of started pitching my paper, is that they talk about three fusion skills. And I thought this was very interesting, the way they sort of clubbed it and put
Mhm.
it together. Good Accenture speak, nice consulting language. But the point is, they call them three things. They call them three fusion skills that are required to excel in this new era of AI human collaboration. They call them intelligent interrogation, judgment integration, and reciprocal apprenticing. Yeah.
Wow. So for
So
all the non out there, Sridhar, much like me, who don't understand what any of those words mean, do you want to tell us?
absolutely, right? I think, like, that's the thing. I think the point they're making is these things are not skills that you just are. The reason you have to come up with new names for these skills is
Mm.
because these are new skills by themselves, right?
Mm.
And if you look at intelligent interrogation, it's basically what? It's about the ability to elicit the best possible results from LLMs like ChatGPT by prompting them in a structured way. So we keep talking about prompt engineering and
Yeah.
like how it's important. But what they're talking about is they're talking about moving beyond simple prompts or instructions and focusing on optimizing the interaction with LLM to get better reasoning and outcomes. It's about how do you think with AI? So you got to understand that LLMs work differently than humans in the way they think, and therefore they require specific techniques to use them effectively. So let me give a few examples of
Yeah.
intelligent interrogation. So thinking step by step. So LLMs like to think step by step. So if you break down a complex process into small manageable steps, then you can get a lot more out of it. It's not
Mm.
that they can't do it if you just ask them a question, say like, tell me how a nuclear fusion reactor works or something, they'd give you some answers. But if you break it down a little bit, if you're somebody who understands nuclear fusion and then you go in and ask like, okay, the first step in nuclear fusion requirement is that you need to be able to source the right raw material to sort of start working with it. How do you get your deuterium? How do you get your tritium? How do you do that? Where is it available? Then, like, LLMs can go and tell you, like, okay, deuterium is available easily in the sea, in seawater, while tritium, there's very little of it available in the world. You might have to do this and so on and so forth, right? I think, like, I'm just showing off my knowledge of nuclear fission
Yeah, I was like, oh,
in this space, right? I'm talking about nuclear fusion and all that. But the point is that thinking step by step is important. So if you break down a complex process into smaller, manageable steps and instruct the LLM to address each step sequentially, then
mm.
you can get a lot more out of LLMs. Then about thinking in stages. So they talk about introducing AI to complex tasks that require some occupational expertise. So, for instance, it's very used by mastering a set of subtasks. So, first, you give it a lot of information about the law. You say, like, look at this. I'm looking at the law in India, looking at this
Yeah.
particular code, and then, like, guiding it step by step. Then it'll get the context very well, and then therefore it can do it better. So, it's very useful when you're like asking questions and interacting with it in the areas of law, medicine, scientific R&D, and so forth. Then it's also about, like, see, LLMs have a tendency to sort of think very linearly and to sort of give you one solution. So try to think creatively along with LLMs and like ask them to consider multiple solutions. So that will always help you to come up with something better. So you ask them to, because that's how human beings work. We think of multiple solutions. People will have different ideas. And if you want to be successful in sort of communicating your idea at a workplace, you need to have considered other options as well, and then say, yeah, these were multiple solutions, and then say, what are the pros and cons around this, etc. And then it'll help you to sort of come up with that. So I think these techniques combined with a fairly deep understanding of how these LLMs work will allow individuals to collaborate more effectively. So I think that's what they mean by intelligent interrogation. So you don't just ask one question and say, hey, please, there is this email I've received from the client, please reply to this email. I think, like, you might want to
My
say a
client
bit
does
more.
say, client does say this. I want this email to be really respectful, etc., etc. I know exactly what you mean. I think that's such a beautiful explanation as well, Sridhar. But then let's come to the second one, which is
So, do you
judgment.
want to talk about judgment integration? Do you want to say something about it? Yeah.
Yeah, as a non-consultant, I will try. But in my understanding, it is essentially the ability to apply human expertise, right? And our human judgment and discernment on any output that AI generates.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in situations where AI may not have enough business context or ethical context, right? So it's really about keeping a human in the loop and making sure that we're using our learnings from society as a whole and adding it to the elements or outputs that AI has, right? It's not, some people might say it's simple fact checking, right? So it's AI gave me an answer. Can I corroborate it with a source? But I think it goes a little bit beyond that and has like a focus on making sure that every interaction that we have with AI is actually trustworthy and reliable, right? So let's break this down. What does this actually mean? First, I think it's really important to recognize the limitations that AI brings. We know LLMs are trained on a huge amount of data, but some of this data may be outdated. It can lack context. We all know of the fact that what you put in is what you get out, garbage in, garbage out, potentially. And therefore, sometimes when you ask it to do a certain thing or a particular task, it may not actually have the relevant context, right? So when you are leveraging AI for, say, a hyper specialized outcome, you might want to recognize that it might not have all the context and might want to supply it. It's much like having a new joinee on your team and asking them to suddenly solve for the organization's map, or redo an org structure without telling them what the org structure is today, what the pitfalls are, why we changed it, etc., etc. Right? So it's a little bit like that. I guess the second thing is also that AI is at the end of the day AI, right? It is not human. And therefore, there are ethical considerations to be had as well. And that's the second element of judgment integration, which is identifying potential biases that may be embedded in AI by
Yeah.
itself, simply because it's been trained on data that's been sourced from different places, right? And this is especially important. I think, Sridhar, you mentioned healthcare at some point, and we're starting to see AI being used more and more in healthcare. But it's especially important to keep this aspect in mind when it comes to sensitive areas like privacy, patient data, health data, etc. And this also makes sure means that you need to discern what are your company's or your own personal ethic code and values, or as a regulator, what are our ethical codes and values that we must uphold while thinking about AI output as well. And then lastly, it's verification and validation, right? We have to be able to identify and scrutinize outputs that may be inaccurate. We all have heard of the term hallucination, which simply put is AI sometimes making up stuff. I find it funny because I think humans also do that. So
Absolutely. We all make up stuff. Yeah. Why
exactly.
only
So
why are people so particular about AI should make up stuff? I think it's becoming more and more human when it hallucinates.
yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
yeah,
But I think at the end of the day, it can be misleading. So taking
sure.
everything that AI says or any LLM gives you as an output at face value is not going to be something that we're able to do. And therefore, one skill that becomes very important is being able to fact check, cross reference information, and enhance the accuracy of AI's responses, right? Really look at all possible sources and make sure that you have robust information going in and coming out of this entire interaction.
Yeah.
And finally, I think what all of this does is make sure that not only is collaboration, and like you said, human AI collaboration is an important term going forward, but not only is it more effective, but it's more trustworthy. That no AI output is just blindly trusted, but has been evaluated critically using human skills of
Yeah.
reasoning, judgment, which ultimately should lead to more better and I think human decision making in some ways.
Absolutely. I think that's what we want, right? We want a human world. We don't want an AI world that way, right? We want a human world. And when it comes to reciprocal apprenticing, it's basically in the context of AI, it involves like a two-way learning process between humans and these large language models. It's about how do you train the AI to understand your specific business and needs and context, and while simultaneously learning from the AI's inputs and outputs and improving your own understanding of the tasks at hand. Sometimes we think just because we've been working at this company for so long, or because we've been doing this particular job for a while, we know better, and like the AI should just be learning from us. I think
Mhm.
what we all learn from AlphaGo and other things for that matter is that sometimes AI can come up with move in that game that no human had ever played before,
We
right?
anticipate. Yeah.
So I think like nobody anticipates some things like that. So I think like it can give you a greater understanding of tasks, or maybe even gives you new options and ideas that you might not have thought of on your own. So I think it's about this collaborative learning process is absolutely key to tailoring AI to specific business environments and maximizing the potential. So let's think of how reciprocal apprenticing works, right? So think first
Mhm.
as humans as teachers. That's something that you do. So users train the AI by feeding it contextual data, organizational knowledge specific to the task they want AI to assist them with, right? I'm working at Takshashila, I'm doing research on AI governance. Then I go and say, like, okay, here's some information about AI governance that I've read. Here's what I think is important. Here are some frameworks that I've used to evaluate different types of governance. Can that be sort of applied in AI, and so on and so forth? So you sort of give it information about different frameworks, different ideas, your approach, your sort of general values, etc. All that you sort of put it in, and you say, like, here's this context. Then the AI itself can start providing some insights and solutions that we might not have considered ourselves. And I think that's the key to getting the most out of AI, because then it's like, this whole human, this reciprocal apprenticing, right? So this leads to new perspectives, a better understanding of really complex problems. Sometimes the human mind is such,
Yeah.
we might see things as much more complex than they really are, and AI can sort of take the emotion out of it, maybe, and therefore is able to come up and say, hey, this is not so complex. This is what you need to do sometimes. And
Yeah.
it might solve a problem. So I think it's about using this to overall improvement in the user's approach to the task itself can happen, and then continuous improvement, because this is an iterative process, and like, you keep, each one keeps teaching the other, and each one's sort of becoming better at this as you go along. For instance, I mean, if you just think of it this way, right? So if you ask Federer or Nadal or Djokovic, and when they were like sort of playing over all these years, and the fact of the matter is, and I like the whole Rolex ad where it talks about the fact that each one has gone out, they're just not playing against themselves and trying to become better. They're also playing against the other person and sort of learning from that. And like, each one is becoming a better player because of who they're playing with. And I
Yeah.
think it's the same thing here. Just think of it as like you're Djokovic and you're playing with Federer and improving your game. I think it's not a bad idea, right? So that's what reciprocal apprenticing is about. And it's about not more than just getting AI to do what you want. It's about establishing that relationship where each one is constantly learning and improving. And I think that's what's going to happen. And it's going to be critical, especially in a landscape where there's new technology each day, every day, something fantastic and wonderful is happening. And the only way is continuous learning in order to stay ahead of the curve. So,
That's so fascinating. But I think we can go on about this topic perhaps in other podcast as well. I love the Federer ad. You're only as good as, like you said, you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with, right? So,
yeah,
in some ways, it's about giving AI that ability to continuously improve as well. But let's now talk about something that you mentioned a little while ago, Sridhar, is what are regulators and governments really doing? I'm curious, outside of just regulating as well, are we starting to see adoption of AI by governments? I think you and I were discussing about the WEF earlier today and
yeah,
yesterday as well, and there was a whole session there about how education is meeting AI, right?
yeah,
And they talked a lot about the opportunities and also the risks that this rapidly evolving technology really brings with it, which is also talking about how governments can really leverage the benefits of AI in education while also mitigating these risks. Promoting more inclusivity, making sure that
yeah,
biases, something you and I have spoken about again earlier today, is algorithmic biases are taken care of. And also, we're developing new approaches to human educators. What you were saying about us having access to potentially more elaborate
yeah,
courses while
yeah.
being in a different corner of the world, is that now being made possible with the use of AI? And I found that really fascinating because, of course, we often see regulators talk about regulation and what we must do to prevent ill effects. But it was great to hear talk about adoption in an early and responsible manner as well.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, do you want to give the highlights, or do you want to? Yeah, in
Yeah, I
terms
think
of, yeah. So what
something.
do you think? Who is saying what in this particular area? You want to talk about? You were telling me about what this UAE Minister of Education was saying. Do you want to? I thought
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
quite
we can get
fascinating,
into that.
really. Yeah.
We can get into that. I think the Minister of Education, as you said, of the UAE was talking about AI tutors in a classroom.
Mm,
Um, and the class happens as it always does, right? The teacher comes in, they teach, etc. But then the students now have access to an AI tutor that they can go to after the class to answer their questions, and even ask questions about things that they may not have understood in class, but were perhaps too shy to ask or didn't have an opportunity to ask, right? And because they've built it on their own school curriculum, they have a high degree of control and confidence on it as well. And they found that it was really successful. About 80% of the students who used the AI tutor found their grades improved by, I think, around 12%. And what I found great about this is we grew up in an era where, at least I grew up in an era where I had a tutor for everything potentially, right? Because I had access to it. So I didn't
Yeah.
have to just rely on my school education system. I had someone who would be available to me after school hours to get into concepts where I was struggling, math being one such subject for me. But I know not everybody had access to those same opportunities. But
Yeah.
now with these things like AI tutors and doing that in such a responsible manner as well, it levels the playing field so much. It's giving everybody access to the same technology and skill set, and it's not limited by your socioeconomic status as well.
Absolutely. I think this is very exciting. In fact, Bill Gates was also talking about how we could all have personal tutors and they'll teach us in the way that's best suited for us. For instance, I mean, in a classroom, you don't blame the teachers. It's not that, right? I mean, there's a class with 30 students. A teacher comes in and, like, very often teaches in the way that their best, their preferred teaching style, right? Not
Yeah.
sort of catering necessarily to your learning style. If you're lucky, who do you like as a teacher? Because, like, that teacher might have taught in
Gets
a
you.
way which is suits your learning style. Therefore, you say, oh, like, Saraswati Miss was very good because, like, she taught me in the way that I loved. I mean, she gave me good examples. She helped me to sort of, she told me stories and she drew on the board and helped me sort of visualize this better.
Yeah.
And, like, somebody else might have been sounded very pedantic and you might not have liked that. And so I think, like, this is something that's it's great. I think that's wonderful. And I also noted how this Minister of Digital Transformation in Slovenia, Dr. Emila Stomenova Der, talked about the need to increase digital literacy even before increasing AI literacy. I thought that's
Mhm.
fascinating because there's already a huge digital divide,
Okay.
right? So now, is there going to be, and they talk about the need to ensure that school curriculum includes AI and make sure that at least the coming generation is
Don't
sort of
face. Yeah.
much more AI literate. So we
Yeah.
talk about how digital native some of these young people are, and now I think, like, we're talking about the need to be an AI native at some level. So where, like, right from beginning you sort of learn to work with AI, use AI in, like, while you're learning in school. They talk about that, and they also say that there's a need for making Slovenian adults get access to AI education. So that I thought was interesting. That so there's a need for everybody to go out and learn, not just young people, but also many of us who've sort of got into the workforce before the world of AI sort of took over. Then there's Jeffrey Carr, who's the CEO of Skillsoft. He was also part of that panel on this, and he talked about how Gen AI coaches can help employees learn and navigate their career. So everybody could have one executive coach. I remember when I was, like, a fairly senior person, when I became reasonably senior at Accenture, I started
Mhm.
having access to an executive coach and so on, who would sort
Ah,
of help you to sort of do better at your job or, like, understand what things are, etc. You had access to a certain number of hours of an executive coach somewhere, and, like, this person would sort of look at your work and, like, see how to make you better at what you do. So these kind of things now can then be made available to a whole lot of us, right? I mean, right from the
mhm.
beginning, what makes you think that you need an executive coach only when
Only when you
you
become
are,
an
like, you've been
executive.
in the career for, like, you've already
Yeah.
had a reasonably successful career, right? So if we all had access to an executive coach while we worked, and then, like, you'd say, like, this is what's happening at work. What should I do? Do you think this is a good sign, bad sign? Do you think I need to do this better? Why do you think my boss was angry with me today? They might say that, hey, you didn't finish that work on time. You didn't take care to do these things. So why don't you do that? This is the fourth time this week that you did this. You messed up or whatever. Then you can go out, and this is a person who's your friend, right? It's completely
Yeah. You're confident.
your confidant who can sort of help you to manage your career. So that's something that I thought was very interesting. They call this at Skillsoft. They have something called KC, and they use that to facilitate a culture of continuous learning. Yeah.
The way you describe it, Casey, sounds a bit like my mom as well. But I think it's really funny because my colleague and I were having a conversation the other day, and sometimes emails are hard to read. You don't understand the tonality, and we've now taken to asking AI to interpret what that email actually means. And we don't mean help us comprehend the contents of the email, but help us comprehend: is this person angry with us? Is this person perhaps like where are they coming from an emotional space, right? Is it truly urgent? And we've actually found it really interesting because while of course AI always tries to tell you, at least right now it's trying to tell us everything's okay, because I think it knows how anxious I am as a person. But jokes apart, I think it's really interesting for people who are perhaps neurodivergent or perhaps have a hard time fitting into the workplace for various reasons, because not everyone in the workplace is homogenous as well, right? So I think it's such an interesting tool for you to be able to navigate the world as well, and be as your personal assistant and your personal cheerleader. But while talking about the digital divide, Sridhar, something that came to my mind was this. There is no way to talk about the digital divide without talking about women, right? Especially in India. And as I understand from some of the reading, there is also a conversation about how women will be disproportionately impacted by AI adoption, more particularly by job losses driven by AI adoption. Is there any truth to this? And if so, what can we do to address this?
I think the panel was asked this question by one of the people who were in the audience, and I'm going to do exactly what the panel did. They didn't answer it directly, right? So I think the point is that they say that how they talked about what we said earlier, that it's more likely a job will be replaced. It's not that you lose your job to an AI. You might find that you're competing for a job or you're competing for a role. Somebody who's sort of familiar with AI or somebody who knows how to work effectively with AI is more
Yeah.
likely to get the job than someone who's sort of less effective to do so. So ensuring that women are helped to learn AI as much as men will ensure that they do not suffer disproportionately. I think that's the real thing. It's about making sure that there is access to AI knowledge, AI learning to women is going to be important. I think that's the way I think of it. Then, like, there are other sections of society who also get left behind, right? In these kind of
Yeah.
seismic transformations, we talked about digital exclusion, but exclusion from AI could be even more lethal. So I think that's really what it is. And so it happened. I mean, if you look at like women farm workers,
Mm-hmm.
when they used to do a lot of the threshing in the past. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's these huge mechanized threshers which came in. And
Yeah.
like those things just come in, and like now because they are large machines, somehow like it was always felt that a man could drive those machines better. So the women who were getting those jobs, who were doing all that threshing, got replaced, and the men were the ones who sort of learned how to operate these heavy machinery, which could go out and do it. But fortunately, there's no physical strength required in using AI. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, I think you should see less resistance for women to be able to sort of do this. And I think we just need to make sure that I think governments and society as large should ensure that women have access to AI tools and are also able to learn and do these things the way they got. There's no technical reason why women should be excluded, but it could
Yeah.
happen because women just don't get access to any new training and so on.
Yeah. So we continue to need to work on bridging the digital divide, and it's only going
Yes,
to potentially get aggravated if we don't act on it fast, right? That's what I'm hearing. All right, let's maybe do like a quick rapid fire on the last few questions that we had.
sure.
We've talked a lot about AI skills today, right? But we also know that much like a generation is changing every few years now, AI is also making skills redundant, right? Potentially making them obsolete faster. And is it true that the half life of a skill now is less than 5 years?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, I would think. I mean, 5 years is an overestimate in my opinion, and I think continuous learning has to definitely be a way of life for everyone. And I think
Mhm.
that's something that my generation was not quite ready for. Those who succeeded in my generation managed to do some level of continuous learning, but I
Yeah.
think we had much more time. The half life of our skill was much longer than 5 years, and therefore it gave you enough time to learn something new. You could just take some time off, or you could use some lulls in your work to sort of do
Yeah.
it. Today, you have to
Learn it on the
just
go.
budget time for continuous learning every single day in order to sort of do it. I use things like, Google Alerts and so on to learn about topics that I'm tracking, information that I want to learn about. Then I go into it, and over the weekend, I look at some things which I want to sort of dive deeper into and read about and so on. And I think I have the time, I'm doing it, but I think even somebody who's sort of in a much more busy work life ought to also make the time to sort of do this.
Yeah. It's the only
Yeah.
way of
And
life anymore.
so do you want to
Um,
summarize, Anu, in terms of I think we've sort of addressed
we've
it. So do
said
you
a
want to
lot.
summarize for our audience? Yeah,
Yeah,
talked about a
we've
lot.
said a lot. So I think the
Yeah.
first thing is what you said last is we need to continue investing in education, reskilling. All of us are going to need to learn continuously, but equally it's important to equip individuals with the right skills to work alongside AI and adapt in this changing job market. AI is going to automate tasks, as we know, but human judgment is going to be integral in making sure that we all thrive as a society in the AI era, right? And therefore, there is actually more opportunities potentially for us. Pardon me, I'm losing my voice now. More opportunities potentially for us to maximize human potential and create more jobs, even in some ways, right? So
Yeah.
let's think about promoting digital literacy, critical thinking, continuous learning, things that only humans really can do, right? The second thing, like you said, is all of us have to embrace lifelong learning and adapt to these technological advancements. That is going to be essential to harnessing AI. I think none of us can now sit back and say, this is my skill set and this is what I'm going to do till I retire. You just have to be curious, you have to experiment, and you have to keep at it. And like you said earlier as well, I think playing around potentially with AI right now may feel like, oh, it's writing a few emails or it's not really doing much. But these are the skills that will help us discover what more this tool can actually do, and be more equipped as we walk into the next few years where AI could make life look drastically different, right? And then lastly, I think ethics is an important consideration. We've spoken about it and touched upon it. But raising public awareness and capabilities, especially on the limitations of AI, is really, really important. People must be equipped to make critical judgments. We all know misinformation is becoming a big problem, but we're seeing that today. We don't know or can anticipate what will happen in the next few years, and therefore making sure that the public is equipped for responsible adoption of AI and is able to discern good AI output from bad, I think is something that is imminent to do and something that we need to start working on today in order to be equipped for the next few years, right? I think that's about it. Before I lose my voice entirely, Sridhar, do you want to sign us off as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And thanks a lot, Anu. I think it's been brilliant talking to you on this subject. Fascinating as always. And I think, I just like to remind the audience of those three fusion skills. Mouthful, as you said they are, those words, but I think they're very important to think about and learn. Intelligent interrogation, judgment integration, and reciprocal apprenticing. I think they sum it up rather well. And thanks to you, Anu, for joining me in this conversation. And thanks to the audience for listening. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.